Hi, everybody, and welcome to Week 5's presentation on social influence. So today we're going to be talking more about the explicit forms of social influence, and then we're going to touch on group processes. So specifically, we're going to talk about conformity, compliance, obedience, and then in group processes themselves, we're going to focus on social facilitation and social loafing. So to start it off, conformity is the tendency to change our perceptions, opinions, or behavior in ways that are consistent with group norms. So the reasons that people have an issue with conformity a lot of the time is because people want to see themselves as independent, especially in individualistic cultures. So people don't want to be considered conformist. They want to view themselves as nonconformist. People also have a tendency to view others as more conforming than they view themselves. This is because people view and judge others on their overt behavior, whereas when people are viewing or judging themselves, they're focusing on their internal processing and kind of introspecting towards themselves. Conformity can have both positive and negative effects. So it's positive in the fact that it can help people form and hold on to their communities and coexist peacefully, but it can have harmful consequences such as like risky health behaviors or telling offensive jokes when they view others as doing such. So there are two main reasons that people conform. So they have a need to be right or they have a fear of ostracism. So the need to be right is more of an informational influence. So people want to make good and accurate judgments and assume when others agree, they must be right. So people do this a lot when they look to things like Yelp or product reviews on Amazon. When they just want information, they want to be right. So the fear of ostracism is more of a normative influence. So people fear rejection and they fear the consequences that could come from a deviance. So this can cause us a lot of emotional distress because the need to belong to our social groups is so important to us that when we get ostracized, it can cause us a social pain that feels like a physical pain. And the effects of the ostracism are going to really depend on where they're coming from. So if it's from a close inside social circle, it's going to have a bigger impact on us than if it's coming from an outside social circle. And then, of course, there are always going to be cultural differences. So here we're going to touch on public versus private conformity and the majority and minority influence. So private conformity is also known as true acceptance or conversion. It's a change in beliefs that occur when a person privately accepts the position that's held by others. They're going to maintain this belief long after the group is gone and for a long period of time because they've truly accepted the other position inside themselves. Whereas public conformity is also known as compliance. And it's a superficial change in behavior without a corresponding change in opinion, and it's produced by real or imagined group pressures. So people are going to publicly conform when they're afraid of how they look to others, how others perceive them, and they're going to change their behaviors without actually changing how they feel about the topic. Talking about majority and minority influences. So majority is going to depend on group size, focus on norms, an ally and dissent, and then there's a difference in gender as well. So group size does have an impact on conformity, but only up until a certain point. So when there is a group of 3 or 4 people and one person who has a differing belief, there is going to be a push towards conformity, but after 3 or 4 people, the difference in the numbers is going to be negligible. People are also going to conform more when there's a focus on that norm. So when they're thinking about that social norm or that social opinion, they're going to be more likely to conform. However, people can kind of push back on conformity when they have an ally in dissent. So when there's even one other person who holds their belief, it's going to be able to reduce the conformity when there's even just another person who shares their same belief, even if it's different from the groups. They also see a difference in gender when it comes to conformity based on how comfortable people are with the task and then the type of social situation that they're being faced with. So research has shown that women tend to conform more when they feel like they're being observed in face-to-face interactions or when they are primed with thinking of themselves in romantic situations. So minority influence is the process by which dissenters produce a change in the group. They have this ability when They are consistent in their beliefs, they're powerful, persistent, and unwavering. But there is a difference in objective versus subjective topics and opinions that differ based on majority and minority influences. So majority influences are going to be stronger in objective or factual based opinions or topics, and subjective opinions or topics are going to have an equal amount of influence based on majority and minority. So how people feel, there is a greater minority influence. And then with everything, there is a cultural difference. So collectivistic cultures are typically higher in conformity as well. So compliance is another type of social influence used, and whereas conformity uses implicit and explicit group norms, compliance elicits changes in behavior based on direct requests. And there's many different strategies used, but these depend on several factors, such as how well we know the other person, the status of our relationship with them, our personality, our culture, and the nature of the request. So a couple things that affect it is mindlessness. So words can trick people into submissiveness, and this happens because we as humans are pretty lazy when it comes to oral request processing in our brains. So a lot of the time, just a change in a word can elicit more of a response from people, whereas it can also have the effect on where we just walk past people and we're not paying attention. And if you say something or request something that piques their interest, it's known as the pique technique, and they'll be more likely to submit to whatever you're requesting because you've pulled them out of this mindlessness. There's also the idea of the norm of reciprocity, which is also kind of known as the golden rule. So it's the way we treat others depends on how they treat us. So people fall into the trap of feeling like they need to pay someone back or repay someone for a good thing that they've done. So it causes us to reciprocate that behavior. So another technique that people use to get others to comply are sequential request strategies. These are two-step processes that are used when making requests. So the foot in the door breaks the ice with a small request that can't be refused so that the chances of compliance with a second larger request are greater. Lowballing gets you to agree with the request but then increases it by revealing some hidden costs. Door in the face is kind of the opposite of foot in the door, and that the initial request is so large that it's rejected, and the second smaller request seems more reasonable and people are more likely to comply. That's not all is the strategy used where the request is inflated and then it's made to seem better by revealing some bonuses or some discounts that go along with it. So how do you fight these techniques with compliance? Being assertive is difficult for people, especially in social situations in which they know the other person. But ways that people can do this is by being vigilant, paying attention when they're being hustled, having a high level of reciprocity wariness, so knowing when somebody is doing something because they want you to have to pay them back or reciprocate a behavior. And also people just don't like to be manipulated. So if the request isn't subtle, then they're going to catch on to that, and you're going to be able to kind of put your foot down and be more assertive in saying no. So the third type of social influence I'm going to talk about is obedience. Obedience is changes in behavior that are produced by commands of authority. So just like most everything else, obedience can be both positive and negative. It's positive in it encourages people to follow the law and their instructions of their teachers and their parents and things like that. But the one that people worry about is blind or destructive obedience. And the Milgram studies focused on this a lot, and they produced a lot of really important findings, such as people are going to differ in their obedience based on character traits. So some people are more obedient than other people. Also, the physical presence of an authority figure has a big impact on whether people are going to be obedient or not. Another really big factor is the proximity to the situation that the person has. So the closer they are or the farther they are away from the situation, depending on the situation, is going to affect how obedient they are. One of the explanations that is given for why obedience may occur is engaged followership. And it might explain it because people want to help the authority figure or the situation, so they may be obedient to help that. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about groups. So what is a group? Groups are sets of individuals who interact over time and have shared fate, goals, or identity. So your group could be something like your basketball team, or where you work, or belonging to a gym, or something like that. But groups could also be people who have a joint membership in a social category based on something like their sex or their race. So why belong to a group? We have an innate need to belong to groups as social human beings. It's really important to our social identity and how we self-categorize, as we've read before, and that's really important to our self-esteem and our feeling of belonging. So in each group, there's going to be different roles that individuals hold, different norms that the group has and follows, and as well as different levels of cohesiveness or feelings of closeness within the group. So working in groups can obviously have both its positive impacts and its consequences. It can be really positive in that there are just some things that people cannot do by themselves as individuals. So working with other people in groups can have an impact on helping them achieve their goals and their desires. However, there are consequences, just like with anything else, and I'm going to focus on two of the big ones: social facilitation and social loafing. Social facilitation is the idea that the presence of others enhances our performance on easy tasks and impairs performance on difficult tasks. So this idea was brought about because the presence of others increases arousal. And this increased arousal increases our tendency to perform our dominant response. Now, the dominant response is the reaction that's elicited most quickly and easily, which for something that's practiced or that comes naturally to us that we've done a million times is going to be a good response. So obviously that's going to differentiate the easy tasks and the difficult tasks. So if it's something that's brought about very quickly and we've done it a million times, then the presence of others is going to help us to perform this task, whereas the presence of others on a task that we maybe haven't done before is going to impair our ability to perform that task. Some of the other ideas of why social facilitation occurs is mere presence. So the mere presence of another individual or multiple individuals is enough to produce social facilitation. The valuation apprehension theory is the idea that the presence of others will produce the social facilitation when we feel like we're being evaluated or monitored. And the distraction conflict theory is the theory that the presence of others will produce social facilitation when we feel like they're distracting from us. So when the presence of others are distracting to us, it can create an attentional conflict. So another negative consequence that can happen by working in groups is social loafing. And social loafing is group-produced reductions in individual output. So basically this just means that people are more likely to slack off or exert less effort when they're working in groups because they think that the other people in the groups are going to be able to pick up that slack. And this happens when the individual effort cannot be extracted from the group efforts as a whole. And this happens across the board. People see this happening in workplaces and even on sports teams. And researchers have found that there are times when social loafing is more or less likely to occur. So people are less likely to social loaf when they have a personal value in the outcome they're trying to achieve. And if they believe that they can help to actually achieve that outcome, they are going to be less likely to social loaf. And just like with a lot of things that we have seen, there are definitely cultural differences that come with social loafing. So collectivistic cultures are less likely to social loaf, except when they are concerned with behaving consistently with group norms. So they're going to social loaf less because they are more concerned of the negative impact that their social loafing could have on the group outcome. So as we discussed, social influence can have a really big impact on how we behave in groups and individually. And some of the things we talked about today are conformity, compliance, obedience, and then in group process, we touched specifically on social facilitation and social loafing. So the questions that I posed to you guys today are, based on the reading, is working in groups more beneficial or harmful? And how can a person's spirituality guide them when faced with social influences?